Hello to my lovely EP government kids out there somewhere in cyberspace. This is our first recorded lecture, so we'll see how this goes. As you can tell, I'm sitting in my classroom because that's where I get work done better than at home, and my dog is much less likely to bark here because she's not here with me. I'm going to start every recorded lecture that I can with this that says register to vote. So if any of you are going to be 18 by November 3rd, which is the presidential election, of course, and all sorts of other offices in that too, all 435 House of Representatives, and then 33 or 34 senators and a whole bunch of local people, including like school board and judges and all that kind of stuff. So it's a super, super hugely important election. And if you're going to be 18 by November 3rd, I want you to register to vote, and I want you to go vote in that election. So I will talk to you about how to register to vote. It's actually super, super duper easy. And I have forms for you that I can send home if you want. But that is not what we're talking about today. Today, we are going to be talking about meanings of democracy and democratic values. And so you've probably heard a million times like core democratic values, right? You learn that in elementary school, and it's, liberty and freedom and patriotism and popular sovereignty and all that kind of good stuff. So we're going to go a little bit more into that today. As I kind of talked about in my intro letter, I'm choosing very carefully the live sessions and the recorded sessions. So the recorded sessions, they are super important. It's stuff you need to know. And I try not to tell you stuff that isn't going to be super duper important for the AP test, but also I get off track. So we will definitely talk about things that are not going to be on the AP test, but I'm not going to waste time in a recorded lecture giving you stuff that you don't need to know. Okay, so just understand that. So if you're watching this, you need this information. We are the textbook, if you are gonna obviously part of your assignment is to read that, or was from the last homework. So we're still kind of section 1.1.1.2. I kind of go all over the place in these first couple of chapters, just because there's just a whole bunch of stuff, and some of it I really go through line by line, and others I just sort of jumble it all together. So somewhere in sections 1.1 or 1.2, possibly 1.3, you'll find all the information from our live session and from this one. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. See if I can do it right this time. I've tried to do this a gajillion times and it has not worked. What I'm also going to have to remember is that I'm keeping my video on. So those of you who've had me in class before know that everything that you ever need to know about what I'm thinking, you can just see right here. So I will have to remember that I'm on video. It was kind of nice before we had our webcams, because then I could just make whatever face I wanted to and it wouldn't matter. All right, so here we are. Meanings of democracy. You can find this in Google Classroom. So I believe it's Unit 1, Topic 3, if I'm not mistaken. And then obviously it's also on my website. But what goes along with it, which is a values scenario, that's also on Google Classroom. So that's the end slide of this presentation, and then you can go through there. All right, let's get going. I promise I won't give this long of an intro every time that I go to do a recorded lecture. So we'll just kind of get right into it, except for my register to vote thing. All right. So meanings of democracy, like I said, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, all of chapter 1. Okay. Wow, that's real bright. Okay, so meanings of democracy. We put democracy into 3 different categories: values, processes, and political structures. So values is really what we're going to focus on today. And, it's like I said, those core democratic values that you have talked about forever and ever. But we're, really specifically going to look at a few of them. And then this always happens. I'm not even tired, by the way, but like when I start lecturing, I start yawning, and then I'm like, well, how do the kids feel? I'm yawning. My gosh, they have to be bored too. But don't be bored yet, because I'm only like 5 minutes in. All right, so system of interrelated political processes. Political processes meaning like we elect people. Okay, that's a process. Elections are a process. So we, choose people for office and remove people from office via free and fair elections, which is like a tenet of democracy. Um, we also have the concept of majority rule, right? So all you need is, usually, well, 50% plus one, um, in order to win something. Honestly, though, most of our elections are done via what's called a plurality instead. So the difference between a majority and a plurality is that the plurality means just you have the most votes, right? So oftentimes, like if you have, like you see this more in primaries than anything else, because you'll have like 5 different candidates running for, the nomination for a party for an office or whatever. Like let's say, so we're in the 10th congressional district, which is like, into Macomb County a little bit and like all of the thumb. And up here, it's a pretty red district. And what I mean by that is like we're pretty reliably Republican. And so usually like the congressional seat for the House of Representatives is up this year because Paul Mitchell, who's our current representative, has decided he's not running anymore. He had 2 terms of it and decided that was enough. So there was, when he ran for it, there's like 5 people that ran for the Republican nomination. And so none of them got over 50% of the vote, but Paul Mitchell got the most out of any of them. So he ends up as the nominee. So that's plurality. So it's majority rule, but it's also plurality rule. Like whatever the most people want as decided by elections, like that's what we're gonna do. And then political process is protest as well, free expression and protest. And boy, oh boy, if you didn't live under a rock since we left school on March 13th, you saw all forms of protest. So first we saw the folks protesting in Lansing against the regulations and restrictions that were put down in like the first lockdown, right? So the people that like they're literally signs like I want a haircut. I'm like, oh my gosh. So, but that's their right. Like even during a pandemic, even during a lockdown, when there are restrictions on the amount of people that can meet at one time, even outdoors, their First Amendment right to protest or petition or peaceably assemble. Although you can argue in a lot of the different protests whether they were peaceful or not, but your right to do that is still it's cemented in the Constitution. So that kind of goes above global pandemic. So you saw those protests in Lansing, and then later on through excuse me, early summer, you saw a lot of protests for equal rights, human rights, civil rights with the George Floyd murder. So there's been lots of examples this summer of people using their freedom of expression and their freedom to assemble in meaningful ways to them, whether you personally agree with either or both of those, and you or not, you have to agree at least if they have the right to do it. Okay. All right. The last one is a system of interdependent, so meaning like going together, political structures. Those are what's called linkage institutions. We have an entire unit that we'll do on linkage institutions. It's unit 5, but we do it as the 3rd unit just because I like to do things out of order. Actually, it makes a ton more sense to do it the way I do it, but College Board doesn't listen to me. So that's what I want. But linkage institutions are things that link government to people. So elections and the media and interest groups and political parties. So those are all linkage institutions, and they're interdependent because they all obviously work together to create our political system and have people involved in it. Okay. Now, system of interacting values. And again, this is kind of what we're going to spend the most amount of time on here. So we have our shared values, and again, this idea of the core democratic values, but I've just taken 5 of them. I think there's 9 core democratic values. The 5 that your book and this curriculum in particular focuses on are natural rights, personal and economic liberty, individualism, equality of opportunity, and popular sovereignty. So we'll talk about each of those individually. And this little like yellow burst over here. If you happen to be watching this with somebody else, which I know some people are like setting up little like school pods and stuff. So if that happens to be you, if you want to pause and like turn to somebody and be like, which of these is most important to you? That'd be cool to have kind of your own little discussion. It's a tough question. I think, if you were to ask me, I would go with natural rights, like natural rights being human rights, because that kind of everything else sort of falls, from that premise. But you didn't ask me. You just got my answer anyway. That's the thing about recording. I get the whole platform to myself. All right. Who said this? Shared values define us more than our differences. And if you've had me in class the last couple of years, you've seen this poster in my room. It's actually on my door. Let's see, I'm going to turn that. I don't know if you can see it right. There it is right there. And my hand sanitizer. I don't even know if you saw that. I don't know if I worked my webcam properly or not. But you probably just got dizzy seeing like, my room go in and out of focus. But anyway, so that quote's on the board or on my door. If you saw the, little tiny who said it, or if you recognize this gentleman right here, said by John McCain, who's a longtime senator from Arizona, Republican senator from Arizona, became very, very, very bipartisan later in life or later in his career. He, because it was sort of hard right, and then moved over to the center and then moved back into the center, back to the center, kind of followed like the, the flow of politics in the country, but incredibly well respected. He ran for president in 2008 against Barack Obama. And there is a widespread theory that he would have won to not pick Sarah Palin for his roommate, who is, very famous for alluding to the fact that she understood foreign policy because she's from Alaska and could see Russia from her front porch. There you go. All right. Shared American values. So these are the same ones that I just put up before. Just again, natural rights, personal liberty, and economic liberty. Individualism, equality, economic opportunity, popular sovereignty. Okay, here we go. So natural rights. I got a lot about rights in this class. You have your idea of like natural rights, and then you have civil rights. So civil rights are things that are like rights that have been granted by a government to extend protections to citizens, right? So you think about like Civil Rights Act of 1964. And, that was really extending rights that white men had to persons of color, to women. It was a lot of like non-discriminatory stuff in there, right? So those are civil rights. Natural rights, which are also called human rights, are rights that you have just because you're a member of the human race, okay? They're above any sort of government control. However, in our history, and not just in the US, but, globally, there has been a lot of human rights violations. Most specifically in our history, you can look at slavery, right? So taking an entire race of people and enslaving them would suggest to you that the people who did that did not have a strong belief in natural human rights and believe that there was this sort of like hierarchical order by race, or also by gender, right? Because women did not have the same rights as men at that time. So we don't have a great history with human rights. And I think for me, it's just very difficult to grasp this idea that anybody could think that like you're above or like that you're above somebody because you're of a different race, because you're of a different nationality, because you're, of a different gender or gender identity or sexual orientation or anything like that. Like all of these things that just come with you being you, not things that you choose or not things that you can help. Like for somebody to put you below because of one of those things, like just doesn't jive with me. Like I don't get it. But I think that, while we technically all agree that, human rights, like everybody has the same rights as human beings, I think that in practice, historically, that has not necessarily been the case. So we are working toward that. Human rights are not supposed to be political. They have turned political. I shouldn't even say turned, they've always been political. So we're hoping at some point that everybody in the country, the world can agree that, everybody is deserving of life, right? And the same, basic rights as anybody else. All right, that's my main soapbox. So this is what I said, like in our first session, our very first session, like some things are not up for debate with me because they just shouldn't be up for debate at all. And one of those is human rights. So we're not even we're not even going to entertain a discussion on that. All right, personal liberty. What we mean by that, personal, individual, liberty being freedom, right? So individual freedom, meaning that everybody, kind of within legal limits has the opportunity to make choices. This idea of self-determination means that like everyone is able to realize their own goals in life. You can own private property, whether it's your house or your business or a boat or whatever it happens to be. Your personal liberties, many of them are found in the First 10 Amendments, which of course is a Bill of Rights. So you have that's where you have your freedom of, religion, expression or speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom to petition the government, right to bear arms, right to be secure in your home, right? So Fourth Amendment search and seizure, that sort of thing, right to trial by jury in criminal cases, that sort of thing. So those are your personal liberties. It is let's just talk about the fact that it's August 20th and the bell just rang. So that does not mean you're dismissed. The bell doesn't dismiss you, I dismiss you. Anyway, so it is important to note this last bullet point here, which is that your personal liberties are not absolute. And this was also such a fantastic real-time discussion of this happening over the summer and the era of COVID, right? So, people talking about even just the mask debate, which is insane, right? So I just cover my eyes. This right here has become political, my right to not wear a mask. It's okay, so we've sort of lost over the years this concept of the common good, right? And people really, really value their own individual freedom. And I'm not saying they shouldn't. I value my own individual freedom. But, to take it to the point where it's you don't have to follow laws just because you don't think that they're correct or you agree with them is a little bit different. So you kind of want to look at people who refuse to wear masks and be like, why do you wear a shirt? You walk into a store, because it also says you can't walk in without a shirt on. Nobody really says that. So, or argues that point, thank goodness. But anyway, so personal liberty, we value it so high in our country that I do believe that many people take it as absolute, even though they shouldn't. Okay, individualism. Again, the American way is individualism, right? So the individual is the central measure of value in a democracy, meaning that everybody's opinion matters, everybody counts, everybody's own individual person is important in a democracy. The opposite of individualism is statism. So if you think about your countries with very little freedom, areas that are bordering more on that totalitarian side, North Korea, Cuba, China, that sort of thing. The state is the central measure of value. So everybody puts like the government and the country above themselves. Whereas in America, we put ourselves above the country. Like we're still very patriotic, right? And we still, believe in our country and, believe in America and like our political structures and processes and that sort of thing. But we're not like, holding military parades for our president. Like they do in North Korea, right? We don't all have like pictures of, the president like 8x10s in our houses. So there you go. Live in North Korea. Anything that limits individual choice in terms of, politics or policy usually generates very, very intense political conflict. And of course, I have masks up here again. Like just the idea of like, do you have to wear a mask? Do you not? Can spark these, kind of ridiculous debates. But then you look at other things that are, have very real consequences. Like you look at your pro-life, pro-choice, right? So a woman's ability to choose to terminate a pregnancy other than not be able to choose that. Like that is one of the hottest hot button issues in our country and has been for a very, very long time. And it literally moves people to one political party or another. Like what we call single issue voters, like people who just vote on one thing and don't care. Like, I don't care about anything else as long as this person agrees with me on this one thing, then that's my person. And in a lot of instances, like your single issue voters are pro-life or pro-choice voters. All right, equality. Equality is a tough word. It shouldn't be, but it is. So, one of the first lines of the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. And then, of course, if you're a Hamilton fan, you can finish that line. When I'm the Thomas Jefferson, I'm compelled to include women in this equal work, right? So anyway, if you haven't seen Hamilton, you just think I'm crazy, but so this idea of like all men are created equal, but then you turn around and like hold other men as slaves, right? So again, we've had a very difficult relationship with equality. Okay, sorry. We've had a very difficult relationship with equality over our history. But what is important to know is that we have a lot of different measures of equality and things that everybody agrees with in terms of equality and things that are, kind of on one side or the other. So like to be equal means a lot of different things. So one thing, like there's a couple, like it says up here, different definitions of equality that are accepted, is political equality, right? So everybody has equal voting power. Everybody has equal protection under the law, which is due process. So like due process basically means there's a set of rules that people have to follow in order to uphold the law, right? And there's two different kinds of due process, but that's like way later in the course. Everybody has equal voting power, right? So my vote counts just as much as anybody else's. I mean, when you get into the electoral college, it's a little bit different, but I'm allowed to vote, right? So, which wasn't always the case. Of course, 100 years ago, 19th Amendment passed, which gave women the right to vote. Not super long before that, just like 40 years or so. Black people were given the right to vote. In the 70s, 18-year-olds are given the right to vote. So everybody has equal voting power, except you guys, because you're not 18, but there's reasons for that, I suppose. And then the other thing that everybody sort of accepts is this idea of equal opportunity. So regardless of where you come from, what background you come from, that should not limit your opportunity to achieve whatever you want to, right? That idea of individualism, that idea of personal liberty should not be influenced by your background. Like if you come from a poor area, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have the opportunity to go to college and to, get a job if that's what you want to do. Or get whatever sort of education or training that you want. Again, having a belief in equality of opportunity and actually believing that it's the case are two different things. So I think that in theory, certainly everybody's like, yep, we have equality of opportunity. I think in practice, you don't need to look much further than down a few streets to see that not everybody is given those same opportunities. So this says right here, the equality that is not agreed upon by everybody is that which involves government creating conditions of equality or creating economic equality through policy. And policy means like laws that are passed, right, through Congress, signed by the president, what have you. And to create economic equality is things like social welfare, right? So food stamps or that like during COVID, adding the $600 a week and now the $300 a week to people's unemployment, offering unemployment benefits at all, and offering things like, public health insurance, right? So for like, if you fall below a certain income level, you're eligible for Medicaid, whereas, I get my health insurance through my work, right? So there's a lot of there's issues out there, people that have issues people have, with public health care, thinking that, well, it shouldn't be publicly funded, it should be privately funded, and just get a job and that kind of stuff. So where people disagree and where the political parties go like this in terms of equality really is how far are you willing to allow the government to go to create economic equality. And we would never go so far as rob the rich, pay the poor, that sort of thing. But a lot of people believe that, when the rich pay higher taxes and it goes to fund different social programs, that really is, it's creating economic equality, and it's not fair because I worked for mine, and so why aren't these people working for theirs, right? So that's kind of where that whole debate goes. All right, a belief in economic opportunity, that's another shared value. So we have, of course, I'm sure you've heard of the American dream, right? We are the land of opportunity, and as long as you work hard enough and you have initiative, then you can achieve economic success. And I have a little image up here. It's from farm boy to senator, but this is one of the Horatio Alger books, and Horatio Alger was a writer way back, in the day, and all of his books were, this pull yourself up by your bootstraps and, achieve the American dream. And so, where you hear people they'll say things like, well, I worked hard for this, so why does that person get it? Why is the government giving it to them when I had to work hard for it? That's this mentality of these Horatio Alger books, right? No, it is the American way to work for what you get, and the harder you work, the more you'll get. So that is definitely a belief system in our country. And like I said here, this very concept, this individual initiative and hard work equals economic success, is one of the driving forces behind the division of political parties. So what you have to understand, and it's later on in this, but the main difference between being conservative and being liberal is size of government, right? So it's what should the government do? What level of intervention should they give in various things? So in terms of economic opportunity, the conservative view is that you already have your opportunity, right? So you shouldn't rely on government help because everybody has the opportunity to be what they want. And if you're not doing it, then you're doing something wrong and you need to do something different. And the liberal view is that economic opportunity does not exist. And they look at people in different, in impoverished areas and say, you can't tell me that these people have the same opportunity as somebody who grew up, in a very wealthy family where, they had enough food on their table and, education was pushed and all this kind of stuff. And so they say, people who need help, who are they going to rely on for help? What has to be the government, right? So that's kind of the difference right there economically between conservatives and liberals. This idea of the American dream and the land of opportunity explains capitalism, which is our economic system, which you learned about in ninth grade, which places a value, again, on ownership and hard work and competition and laissez-faire, right? So Adam Smith and this idea of the invisible hand and laissez-faire economics, which is like government doesn't interfere unless they absolutely have to. And again, this idea that everyone is free to own the factors of production. So like if I want to go start a business, I can. That's what it means to own the factors of production. Popular sovereignty. Sovereign is to lead, right? So popular sovereignty means that, like, again, kind of this idea of like whoever the people choose, that's who gets to lead, right? So this is the ultimate political authority rests with the people. There are exceptions where that's not true. Right, so you think about like maybe the president's cabinet, right? So the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Education, Secretary of Health and Human Services, like all those different, there's 15 cabinet departments. None of those people are democratically elected, right? They're chosen by the president and confirmed by the Senate, right? You think about, even though it's not supposed to be political, the court system has become very political, just in the cases that they, choose to take up and what they decide and whatnot. And at the federal level, those people are not democratically elected either, right? So the Supreme Court justices are appointed. All federal judges are appointed. Now, if you're going to vote, you'll notice that there are some judges that you vote for, but those are state or county level judges. So, like, yes, ultimate political authority rests with the people-ish. Okay, and then you don't even get me started in the Electoral College, right? So, for like in 2016 and 2000, the winner of the popular vote, meaning like the person who got the most votes of everybody in the country, did not end up becoming president because of the way the Electoral College is split up. So, and I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying like that's what happened. It's also popular sovereignty is this idea that government derives its powers from the consent of the governed. And if you, most of you had world history last year, some of you are taking it concurrently. When we talk about Enlightenment people, that's a very John Locke view, is consent to the governed. And, you see, again, that idea in the Declaration of Independence, like basically Thomas Jefferson being like, look, if they don't do what we want to do, you get overthrown. And so this idea that a government only exists because the people they govern allow it to exist in its current form, that's a consent to the governed. And this idea of the social contract, right, which is a Rousseau thought, that, again, you're allowed to govern because I tell you you're allowed to govern. But because of this idea of popular sovereignty, we have a very specific method for the people who don't win elections to just bye-bye, right? So they're willing to accept defeat. Like if you lose an election, unless it's close and you're asked for a recount, whatever, like the Bush-Gore election, that kind of thing. I was in 2000. For the most part, losers of elections are willing to accept defeat. Of course, this is Hillary Clinton. And she was actually, that was from her concession speech in 2016. And I know that because I remember the outfit she was wearing because it's purple. I know you guys think I'm weird for remembering that, but so Republicans are red, Democrats are blue, right? And so what do you get when you mix red and blue? You get purple. So that was like her attempt to be like, okay, let's put differences aside and be bipartisan and what have you. So anytime you see a leader, political leader wearing purple, that is why. All right, so we do have conflicts among our values, right? So like we look at a competitive economy, so capitalism versus an egalitarian society or equal society where everybody kind of has the same. So like we're putting our economic opportunity up against our notion of equality. Corporate wealth and its influence on politics. Again, like this idea of capitalism versus popular sovereignty, right? So we'll go through a couple of theories, or maybe we already did. I think we already did, of theories of democracy. Yeah, there's in the last one. where you look at, remember, elite theory, right? Where just a few people have so much influence. And if you look at campaign finance right now, that's kind of how it is, right? With corporations being able to donate. And we have political action committees and super PACs or super political action committees that just can just throw money and money and money and money and money at getting people elected or getting people not elected. And so, is that really then popular sovereignty, right? Is that really the consent of the governed? Is that really us as individuals having a say in politics, having those same voting rights, that voter equality? Or are we kind of passing that all along to, the highest bidder? All right, and this is what I said before, and I'll say it again because it's obviously important. It's in the giant yellow box for you. The central debate between political parties revolves around the role of government in solving these types of problems. Okay, so you have to understand that, people call each other names, on each side of the spectrum, and think that there's really no place that they can come together. But if you really think about how these parties developed and where they've gone, it is about the amount of government intervention. So a conservative view, Republicans, think less government intervention is better than more. And beyond that, to move things to the state and local level. So for sure, less federal government involvement is better. In a liberal view, or the liberals being the Democrats, say that more government intervention is necessary and needed. So, you would see in terms of policy, you would see a Democrat who would want to increase social programs. And the way you do that is through taxes, right? So tax increases. And then you would see Republicans saying, no, we can't do tax increases. We have to leave money in the hands of the people. They'll spend it the way that they should. All right, so here comes your homework. And again, this is in Google Classroom on a different sheet, but it says pick one of the scenarios and write at least 2 well-developed paragraphs on here. So all these values we just talked about, right? So natural rights, personal liberty, individualism, equality, economic opportunity, and popular sovereignty. So you're either going to write on scenario 1 or scenario 2. Scenario 1 is where you're forming a new society. So blow all this up. You're going to form a new society. You can only keep one of these values. Which one do you keep and why? So I'm going to keep, economic opportunity and nothing else, right? So justify why you're doing that. And then scenario 2, you're still blowing up current society, forming a new one, but you just have to leave out one of those values. So you get to keep everything else except for one. So which one are you throwing away and why? And they're essentially the same scenario, except obviously in one you keep one and one you throw one away. But scenario 2 is for if you can't really decide which one you like the most, then you can just pick all of them except for one. So either one of those. Like I said, 2 well-developed paragraphs. So when you go to the screen or the sheet for it, you'll see both of these. Scenario 1 is on top of the box and scenario 2. So obviously you only have to write in one of those. Okay, so that's on Google Classroom, and that I'll put an exact due date on it. I'm not 100% sure. Like I said, I'm pre-recording this. I'm not 100% sure when it's going to be due, depending on what else we have gotten done. But once you are watching this and it is, and the assignment is up there, then I will have that information for you on due date. All right, let's stop sharing. And my friends, you just hopefully got through without fast forwarding too much, your first recorded lecture online. I wish this was in person, because even the ones that I'm recording still are such good fodder for discussion, but it is what it is. So we'll get through it. But certainly if you have any questions on anything that you heard me say, you know, obviously go back through and watch again if you want, or certainly email me or shoot me a message on Remind, and I'll answer whatever questions that you have. And I always try to get through like just let's get through the information. But as you'll notice, and as you know, if you had me in class before, I certainly expand on a lot of things. So if you're just like writing down everything that's on the screen, I think you're missing quite a bit of what I'm saying. But you'll learn. All right. So nice to see you, kind of. You're seeing me. I'm seeing you right now. I'm seeing myself on the computer screen. But yeah, let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you soon. Goodbye.